Hey there guys, coming at you with a new tutorial specifically on soldering. So soldering is a general skill that's very important for electrical engineering, and this video is just going to be centered around the practice of soldering and some tips and tricks and things that you can do in order to get your projects made in a structurally sound and conductively sound way. So in case you don't know, soldering is the practice of taking a material called solder, which is usually lead based, although newer types have less lead or no lead. There's lead free solder now, which is really cool, better for the environment. And you can have many different sizes. For instance, this is really small solder, really thin. It's a lot better for soldering onto printed circuit boards or prototype boards, such as this one, which we'll get to later. Big solder like this is a lot better for connecting large wires together, like cables and things. So without further ado, let's get started on this. I'm going to show you several different types of solder connections that you can do. And let's start with introducing the soldering iron. So this is a soldering iron. This soldering iron is about a year old, but it looks a lot crappier because I misuse it a lot, but I'm not gonna go into detail about how. Usually you'll have a sponge around here in this area in the solder stand. I don't have a sponge anymore. It kind of crumbled to pieces, so this is just a wet paper towel, but it should do for the purposes of this video. That's to kind of wipe off the iron. And then there's a solder stand, which usually pretty much always looks like this, with a spring kind of coming up, and then the soldering iron rests there. So that's the tool we're going to be using. This is the material, and you can solder all sorts of things. So you can solder wires together, you can solder components like this transistor to circuit boards, the works. So basically, soldering is to make sure you have a sound, conductive connection between two things in order for an electrical current to pass through. That's why solder is made of metal, because all metal is electrically conductive. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to show you how to solder this transistor. This is a power transistor. It's a TIP122 transistor. That's an NPN transistor. So I'm going to show you how to solder that to this circuit board. You see how this circuit board has metal rings on each of the holes and also on the bottom. Sometimes they don't have it on the bottom. So in case they only have it on one side, you need to make sure that you put your component in the other side, like so. Alright, so now you've got your component inside these holes, and this works for any component, by the way. I'm just using the transistor for now. And then you can bend it like this, or bend any of the leads any which way in order to make it stay before you make the soldering connection. So now you can see I've bent out all of the leads there, and now it won't fall out when I shake it, so I can easily solder connections to it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have a clean soldering tip. So this right here is not too clean. You want to make sure that you can see some shiny kind of chrome finish on the tip right there. So I think I need a new wet paper towel in order to carry that out. Alrighty, now as you can see, as I wipe my soldering iron across the wet paper towel, steam is coming off. It's nothing to worry about. It may sound a little bit alarming if you've never soldered before. I think it's pretty cool and fun. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, some soldering irons, I didn't experience this at first, have a temperature setting here. Generally, you kind of want to go as high as possible, although any of these temperatures on here will be capable of melting solder, but the higher the temperature, the better the experience is going to be for you. But if you want to play it safe, you can easily turn the temperature down. But I'm going to leave it up here. That's a little bit better. Just a little bit on the tip there should be enough. As I said, I've mistreated this soldering iron, so I'm not going to tell you how, because then you're going to try it. Basically, the idea is you're going to want to heat up the leads with your soldering iron, and then just press the solder onto the heated up lead. So let's give it a shot. So I want to press my soldering iron down so it touches both or just one of the things, and then press my solder onto it. As you can see, smoke's coming out, and just a little bit goes a long way. That's a very, very good connection right there. Alright, so take a look at that. Right, so all I did here was press my soldering iron down to the base of this lead right here, and then while it was heating up, I just lightly touched like this that soldering iron there, and you saw the smoke. That's how you know it's working. And just a tiny little drop of it gets on here, and as you can see, it very nicely spread across the hole that the lead was going through and kind of crawled up the hole a little bit. So it has a nice kind of conical structure, and that's how you know you've done a good job. If it ends up like gooping up on there, that's not going to be a great joint. It will probably work, but you may want to redo it for safety purposes. So usually you can trim the lead with a set of wire clippers like this one. Just kind of get as close to the base as possible and snip. I actually cut the wrong one there, but that's okay. You're going to want to get close to the base and snip. So now, as you can see, I have all three leads soldered onto this prototyping board, and I believe it's base, collector, emitter for this transistor specifically. And I've trimmed all the leads, and as you can see, there's a nice conical piece of solder on each of these three leads, securing it to this circuit board. And it's very structurally sound. It's not going to come off anytime soon, and it's ready to be plugged into some other wires. So the next thing we're going to do is learn how to solder wires together so that you can have a connection between two wires. So we're going to be soldering this wire right here to this wire right here. So the first thing you have to do is strip your wire. That can be done a variety of ways. You can use scissors, you can even use a knife. So this is just a kitchen knife here, and I'm going to kind of cut into the wire, but not enough in order to cut the metal, just the plastic insulation, and then kind of just scrape. There you go. There you go. The copper wire has been exposed, and I usually like to twist all those strands together so that they don't break. But you can also use a tool like this. This is called a wire stripper. So as you can see, there's a kind of hole in between these two blades right there in the center, kind of diamond-shaped hole. So that allows me to just clamp down on this wire and just pull. And simply enough, the copper wire has been exposed. The white was done by the stripper, and the gray was done by the knife, and the white is just a lot cleaner. Now let's just strip our other piece of wire. Boom. Alright, so in order to have a really tight joint between these two pieces of wire so they don't fall apart, we're going to use what's called heat shrink tubing. So that's this yellow stuff right here. I've got some other pieces over here for it. It doesn't have to be yellow. For instance, this is a green piece that's big. Can be used for cables. You guys have probably seen this in some of my other projects. You're definitely going to want to put this piece of heat shrink tubing around this wire first before you solder any connections, because then you're not going to be able to put it on. Before soldering, we have to mechanically secure these wires together. So there's many different ways to do that. You can look it up online. For some applications that require a lot of heat, like inside a 3D printer, if you need a heating coil for evaporation web shooters or something like that, you would definitely need to mechanically secure the wires together by kind of knotting them together in a very specific way. But we're not worrying about that right now. I usually just like to twist the copper wires together, so I'm just going to twist these with my finger. As you can see now, they are secured. Most electrical engineers have something called helping hands. I do not. so I just kind of lean them against something. Helping hands have like alligator clippers, and they're really helpful for electrical engineers in order to hold wires together while you're soldering them, or hold components together while you're soldering them, or hold components to wires or wires to circuit boards. Anything you can think of, really. They're very helpful, but I just don't have any, so I just kind of lean them against something. Again, I want to clean my solder tip, and then I kind of place my soldering iron and my solder on the wire at the same time, and I'll get a nice chrome silver finish, kind of rub the soldering iron up and down the wire, and voila, clean it up a little bit. So as you can see, they've turned from copper to kind of a silver finish, and they are secured together. So we definitely want a more inline position for these wires. We don't want them to come together in a cusp like this. What you do then is just simply bend the wires so that they are parallel to each other. That solder connection has now been bent so it is against the red wire. Then you simply slide your heat shrink tubing, try to fit it over both the solder and the red wire. There you go. So now it's soldered and it's completely covered, and I can just shrink the heat shrink tubing using the soldering iron. It happens pretty quickly. Alright. And there you have it. 2 wires soldered together, and you don't have to worry about them breaking. I'm just going to do that one more time with the other wire in order to show it to you guys a second time. Stripping the wire like so, twisting it together, piece of heat shrink tubing over this gray wire, then twisting the red and gray wire together and solder together. Again, placing both the solder and the soldering iron on it at the same time, but I kind of also touch the solder to the soldering iron, kind of rub the soldering iron back and forth. Bend this so that they're in line with each other. Slide the heat shrink tubing over and shrink the heat shrink tubing. Right. And now we've got 2 wires secured very well together. Okay, next you're probably wondering, what if you wanted to solder a component to some wires? In case you wanted to have like a light bulb on the end of a cable, or a button on the end of a cable to separate 2 systems from one another. To demonstrate that, I'm going to show it with this power button. This is not a momentary button, it's just kind of a switch to turn things on and off, but it's a push button instead. So that's off and that's on. And I've already trimmed all the leads down to 2 in order to make sure those are the only 2 that I'm going to be dealing with, whether current can pass through those 2 or not. Same practice as before. You have your wire and you want to strip it like so. You definitely want it to be about the length of your lead. Again, twist it together so it doesn't fall apart, and then the same thing with your other one. Alright, here's where the differences begin, and here's where helping hands would really come in handy. So the first thing you definitely have to do is put solder on your button leads and on your wires first. The reason for that is once they already have solder on them, it's a lot easier to attach them together without having them touching each other for a long period of time. And it's a lot easier to put solder on one thing than it is to put it on 2 things at once that aren't easily attached together. I'm going to lean my wire across this knife here because I don't have any helping hands, and then put solder on this wire. So as you can see, there's now a good amount of solder attached to this wire, and then I'm going to do the same for my other wire. Okay. Do the same for your button. So just touch the soldering iron and solder to one of the button leads in order to put a good amount of solder on it, and do the same for the other lead, like so. Alright, there's now solder on these leads because they're shiny. So before you do anything else, put heat shrink tubing around your wire, because otherwise you won't be able to put it on after it's already attached. Set your button aside there with its solder on its leads, and have your wire with solder on its core, I guess, and get some make sure you have a clean soldering iron again. I'm just kind of struggling with that at the moment. And put some solder on its tip, and then touch the solder and the wire to the lead at the same time. And my job is going to be a little messy. Hopefully yours will be better. Alright, and if you have any excess solder, feel free to just kind of scrape it away with any tool you like. So there's the first one. I'm going to do number 2. You want your heat shrink tubing. Put that around the gray wire and set this aside. And then just get some solder and kind of melt them together. Okay, I think I got it. So it's not as pretty as the other two looked, but it's the best I can do. Now slide the heat shrink tubing over those joints and shrink them. Booyah. Alright. Okay, so I did cut out there because this wire did break, so I had to splice in this purple one. I'm going to put a piece of slightly more heavy duty heat shrink tubing over this couple of wires so that we get an even stronger fit, because these yellow heat shrink tubings, they're pretty thin, so they don't provide much structural support. They're just pretty much so that these two wires don't touch each other and create a short circuit. So I'm going to put this piece of black tubing over everything like so, and then shrink it. That worked better than I hoped. Now you have this button attached to 2 wires. That's been my soldering tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed. I do want to say the reason why I chose these materials to solder is this kind of doubling as a Webshooter video. I know. So in case you guys hadn't heard, winter sucks, and it's kind of hard to use my current suit in the winter. In case you're interested in hearing more about that, go see my last video where I give a successful test of my Webshooters. But a little sneak peek, this is what I've been working on. So it's a Webshooter specifically for the winter time. It's very simple. The only difference really is that it's mounted on the top of the wrist like so, and the fluid comes out from here instead of anywhere in the wrist region. That's basically just to make it easier on my arm, and so that the nozzle doesn't interfere with any gloves I might be wearing. For sure will be wearing, actually. Then that leaves my wrist free, unencumbered, in order to grab onto things. These components are going to go into the electrical systems of this Webshooter. It's a basic circuit. In case you wanted to know more about that circuit, I have a video specifically on how to wire it together. It's using an FSR trigger. That's a force sensitive resistor, for those of you who don't know. This is basically what it is. So it's a resistor which resists the flow of current pretty much infinitely, so it doesn't allow any current to flow from this lead to that lead until you press down on it, and then some current can flow through. Why I need a transistor circuit is in order to turn that signal into an on-off signal. So the FSR will let current through proportionately to how much you're pressing down, but I want you to be pressing down a certain amount and immediately 100% of current is allowed to go through the circuit, or resistance is decreased to 0. That's a very basic way of explaining what's going on, but I hope that's understandable to most of you. But I'm not really a engineering professor, so this button is going to be used to turn it on. These leads here will go to the FSR. Right here, there's the connection point to the FSR. I have my solenoid valve wires here and my battery wires right here. I'm going to try and put that circuit together and see what comes out. Alright, so I'm actually looking at that video that I made almost a year ago right now. I'm going to link it in the description again in case you guys want to see the schematic and how to wire it together. There I just do it on a breadboard, but here I'm going to do it for real in a Webshooter. So that'll be fun for you guys. So this circuit, I made a slot right here for the 3D printed shell to contain that circuit board. So this black wire goes directly to the emitter, which as a matter of fact is the third connection here on the my right, your left most side. So I'm going to stick my black wire in there. I'm going to need to solder that wire. So I hope you guys can see that wire has been inserted right next to the emitter there, but it is not actually touching it. So what I do there is I kind of add more solder to the bottom so that the two are actually just in contact with one another. Just kind of add more solder, drag it across. There you go. So now as you can see, the emitter and the negative lead of the battery are connected together. The next thing to do, you have to connect one of the leads of the FSR to the base of the transmitter, and that's the first lead. Now that would be the my leftmost one, your rightmost one on the transistor. Just choose one, since FSRs don't have polarity. Stick it in the hole, alright, and then bend it on the other side so it stays. I also like to bend it towards what I'm connecting it to, because then there's already something there for it to be connected to. So I bent it towards the base of the transistor. Now I've got to solder that. Alright, so you have it. The base connected to the first lead of the FSR. So the collector would be connected to the thing that we need to turn on. In this case, that would be solenoid. So I've got these solenoid wires here, and strip those wires. And solenoids don't have any polarity either. Just take whichever one you want and connect it to the collector of the transistor, which is the center lead in this case. The next thing to do is to connect the other lead of the solenoid to the other lead of the FSR, and those are both also connected to one of the button leads. This button is actually going to have to be wired through this hole in the back here, like so. Yeah, you know what, let me wire them like wires. So I'm actually not going to use these special tips here. I'm just going to cut that, so, and strip these. As it follows. These two wires here, this one that I'm shaking right now, that's from the FSR, this one is from the solenoid. So those two get attached together along with one of the button leads. Now I'm not going to heat shrink these together because there's 3 of them, so that becomes kind of difficult. I'm going to solder all 3 of those together. And something that I often like to do, put hot glue around a wire joint. Alright, so that's never coming off. We also need to solder the positive of the battery to the other button wire. And that's right here. That one can be heat shrink too, then. Shrink it. Now for this hot glue joint right there, as an extra measure, I like to put electrical tape around that. Just a small piece, not too much. Kind of fold it over, just as an extra measure. And now that should work. Right here, I've already sewn the FSR into the glove. Solenoid should be heard clicking. I turn this on. And it's a miracle. Okay, that's all for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Just a quick note, I did want to post some more kind of opinion piece videos. I think it would be kind of a fun departure. I do want to save those for later in December though, because that's when I'm off from school, so I won't be able to do a lot of this stuff. So I did post a poll and I've seen your votes. I wanted to know how people thought I would react to school or dating or the internet, or how I've dealt with these issues. So school won out by a landslide, and dating was second place. A lot of people in the comments expressed interest in learning about dating, or how my personal experience with it. Of course, I can't go into too much detail. Maybe one day I can, but hope to get the school video out soon, and I also will follow up with the dating video, but the school video will come first because that's the one that won the vote. Just let me know in the comments below. Are you guys more focused on the grades and classes side of school, or the social kind of aspect of school, like cliques, or maybe even bullying? So yeah, just let me know in the comments below what you'd be interested in seeing in that video about school, and I will catch you guys next time. Stay amazing. Alright guys, I just wanted to say a big thank you to my patrons, Leviathan Spider, Future Spider, Caleb Choice, Mustafa Syed, Pete, Spider Kid, Split Shot, Symbiote's Host, and Tyler. Caleb Choice actually gave me the idea for this video, so big shout out to him. Don't forget to check out some of their other videos, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.